Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I called my paper In the Shadow of Sound, and I'm going to speak about the role of auditory imagery in Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. The paper investigates how imagery is constructed and employed in Dracula, how auditory imagery impacts the building of atmosphere, whether this type of imagery influences the character development. At the same time, it investigates or trying to investigate other possible functions of the auditory imagery and how this engages the readers. So the simplest question I could find was what is the role of auditory imagery in Bram Stoker's novel Dracula? The use of imagery does not necessarily depend on the literary genre, but more on the author and his personal writing style. Nevertheless, it is well known that horror fiction, horror literature relies heavily on very vivid and disturbing imagery in order to create a state of fear or horror. Considering the intensity of the emotions that a piece of horror fiction can arouse, one might think that this particular genre engages the reader's senses more than other literary genres, evoking a wide range of emotions and sensations in order to stimulate the imagination about supernatural or unnatural things that are not overtly present in the real world and in the reader's life. Unnatural elements challenge the reader to move beyond their comfort zone and whatever feels familiar to them, and therefore horror fiction encourages taking a fresh perspective that can help explore, define, and possibly resolve personal limitations. As a means of constructing a story and crafting its atmosphere, the various types of imagery stand out as an essential literary tool within the genre. The objective behind using imagery is to offer the reader a multisensory experience while reading a story. The incorporation of imagery in Bram Stoker's Dracula facilitates such multisensory experience given that the author employs various sensory appeals encompassing all five senses: hearing, sight, taste, smell, and touch. Now, about the novel, this is something related to what Professor Crişan has just told us about this piece of work. With all the critical literature that has built up around Stoker's novel, one might ask themselves whether there still is anything left to be discovered, studied, analyzed, discussed, or researched about Dracula. Despite the numerous studies already conducted by scholars and literary critics within the area of Dracula studies, and even outside of it, it seems that there still is a lot to be discovered, dissected, and interpreted about Stoker's novel. According to Professor Clive Bloom, Bram Stoker's tale has not only become the most influential Irish novel, but its protagonist is one of the most popular fictional characters influencing literature and culture in ways thought most unlikely when the book made its first appearance. Such monsters are the nightmares of modernity. I end the quote. What makes this novel so fascinating that it keeps on inviting scholars to study it, writers to draw inspiration from it, film and theater directors to bring it on screen and on stage, pop artists from all over the world to test their talent and imagination in creations inspired by the famous Transylvanian vampire. In a review to Dracula, The Guardian reads, "Dracula isn't a book, not anymore. Dracula is to vampire novels as a study in Scarlet is to detective novels, one of the first, greatest, and the story which introduced the character for those genres. Dracula is the vampire, and the novel is the vampire novel." It is a horror novel, the stuff of nightmares, said Elizabeth Miller, well known in the academic world for her expertise on Bram Stoker's Dracula. It still has the power to frighten. I've had students tell me they couldn't read it at night. The horror is not as graphic as some modern readers would like, but it is visceral. Dracula also has many of the trappings of the traditional British Gothic novel. Villain, maiden in distress and hero, dark aristocratic seducer, castles with creaking doors, gloomy, forbidding landscapes. So old Count Dracula hasn't lost his charm and still appeals to the modern reader, one way or another. Considered by many critics and scholars a classic of the Gothic genre, the definitive vampire novel, Dracula continues to enthrall modern readers due to a complex of elements. The main character, the antagonist Count Dracula, and other intricate I'm sorry, I think it is here, yes. Other intricate characters, the author's narrative style, the story itself and the setting, the continuous fascination of the public with vampire and the impact of culture, the Gothic tropes that, according to the same Clive Bloom, have been remolded by every new medium from, quote, new medium from film to television to the internet and social media, unquote, for the new generation, while, quote, older Gothic tropes are constantly revisited and reworked in new contexts, end of quote. The psychological exploration, the atmosphere, even some of the Victorian anxieties depicted in the novel that seem to be re-emerging as contemporary fears, fear of the other, fear of contamination, of scientific advancement. Is there anything more to be studied, analyzed, about this Gothic classic? Speaking about the genre that the novel belongs to, Robert D. Hume argues that the Gothic novel is defined not by its stock devices, ruined abbeys and the like, but by its use of a particular atmosphere for essentially psychological purposes. This particular atmosphere, with its aura of mystery and obscurity, which seems to be a key element of Gothic fiction, is also built by sensibly engaging auditory elements like sounds, voice, music, in their endeavor to produce the indispensable horror, the writers, and the shadowy streams of imagination and the sublime, or use all types of imagery, of which the most effective are, in my opinion, the visual and the auditory ones. Terror and horror generally appear when the characters experience negative emotions and fear, anxiety, insecurity, helplessness, and frustration, depression represent the most dreaded ones. Stoker makes no exception when he employs detailed, descriptive, and figurative language to create rich imagery, and thus to vividly depict the characters and describe the events, and also to create dread and foreboding. A central element in the overall tapestry of the novel is unquestionably the atmosphere of mystery, of horror, of the unearthly. Imagery is thus used to illustrate the eerie atmosphere of Dracula's land, the haunting beauty of his castle, and the suspenseful moments that occur in the story to enhance the depth of the narrative and impact on the reader. The Count comes from a remote place in Transylvania, an unusual one, a mysterious and haunting land. I would say that setting is crucial. Stoker's vampire came not only from away, but from a distant, remote, mysterious place. That makes him different, foreign, something to be feared and repelled. The other, said Elizabeth Miller. The undead, the vampire, the monster, known by everybody in his residing area, where he lives isolated, but every now and then assisted by some peculiar individuals, is a complete enigma to the young English solicitor visiting. Not only the vampire, but also the local customs, dishes, traditions, superstitions, language, behavior, and beliefs are all unknown to the stranger. In order to explore the themes of the story, the setting changes while the story develops, and this too contributes to the building of atmosphere. The soundscape that accompanies the various settings and persisting in sounds as well as in silence or absence of sounds can carry significant cultural and emotional meaning, representing secrecy, tension, or fear, and convey essential information about the environment. This may be perceived as safe and peaceful, or on the contrary, dangerous and stressful, depending on the effect they have on a person, and subsequently determine the feelings and the behavior of the character. In Dracula, the same as in the Gothic world, where gloominess is an attribute of places like castles, monasteries, cloisters, churches, subterranean villages, these being among the main settings, the characters' visual acuity is more often not fully tested and affected. Their sight being limited because of the dimness around, the character's hearing becomes the main sense to be explored and exploited by the author. Insofar as in imagery is concerned, the auditory one may sometimes set the scene in a much more effective way than the visual one. Since imagination is limitless, and in case of hearing sounds without seeing much, it is our imagination the creator of reality. We may argue that many times indeed the auditory outdoes the visual. So I have here a scheme about imagery when recreating that relies on recreating the sensory world in the absence of physical stimuli, creating vivid mental images that lead to building atmosphere and finally to conveying emotions. And all this is done through descriptive and figurative language. Opens with Jonathan Harker's third districts. The first two pages contain descriptions of landscape. Therefore, we are provided first examples of video. I have here a line, an imagery line that shows that all these types of imagery can be extracted. So, visual imagery. Budapest seems a wonderful place from the glimpse which I got of it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. Then splendid bridges over the Danube, which here is of noble depth and width, intersected with organic imagery. I feared, for example, gustatory imagery when Harker speaks about what he had for supper at Hotel Royal in Klausenburg. I had for dinner or rather supper a chicken done up with some way with red pepper, which was very good but thirsty. Kinesthetic imagery. We were leaving and entering. Tactile imagery. The bed was comfortable. And auditory imagery. A dog howling all night. The continuous knocking at my door. The tone is a positive one for the moment. Jonathan Harker is still traveling, and on the way, he enjoys seeing beautiful landscapes. People. He is delighted to find that the Golden Crown Hotel is old-fashioned. A cheery-looking elderly woman smiles at him, and Dracula sends him a friendly letter saying that he's in a positive connotation. The tone is about one's words like frightened, mysterious, not comforting, organic imagery, mumbled out, auditory imagery are used. The reader also gets a sense of an anxious hurry. I had no time to ask anyone else what it was, all very mysterious and not by any means comforting. And indeed, the last part of the four major entry is avoided organic imagery, indicated a tone of warning and despair. The old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical, told me not to go as I could. Stress. I'm not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. May end on contestatory imagery again. The word queer is used twice. The wine was golden mediash, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. And I could hear a lot of words, often repeated, queer words. Words that were not cheering to Harker, since he had found from his polyglot dictionary what they meant. The next fragments abound in visual imagery, description of landscape and people, and kinesthetic imagery. Harker is on the caleche driving at speed. Quote, the road was rugged, but still we seemed to fly over it with a feverish haste because the driver cracked his big whip over his four small horses. As the sun sank lower and lower, evening fell and it began to get very cold. And we have tactile imagery again. Sounds of commotion, cries of encouragement, lashes of whips on the horses' backs are heard. So again, there are important instances of auditory imagery combined with organic imagery that produce a sense of terror. As the collector is drawing near the pass, we have intense visual imagery again. Dark rolling clouds overhead, thunderous atmosphere, always dark, accompanied by acoustics in low tones. Quietly, I could hardly hear it. It was spoken so quietly and in so low a tone, a sigh, which is immediately followed by strong dramatic auditory imagery announcing the arrival of Dracula's carriage. The horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly. Amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants, the man stammered. Harker changes the carriage that takes off to Dracula's castle, and the new driver cracked his whip and called to his horses. The following paragraph contains organic imagery to describe Harker's feelings. I felt a strange chill and a lonely feeling came over me. I felt a little strange and not a little frightened. I really feared to do so, and within a few minutes to midnight, I waited with a sick feeling of suspense. Then dramatic acoustics produced by the howling of the wolves depict the atmosphere and set the tone. Long, agonized howling, a wild howling began, a louder and sharper howling. The driver, however, uses a soothing tone when speaking and whispering to the horses to calm them down. The last part of the chapter, until Harker gets to Dracula's castle, contain a mixture of imagery. Visual, describing the landscape, the snow, the blue flame, the strange optical effect and the ghostly flicker, the ring of wolves, the horses looking helpless without their master around, and the courtyard of a vast ruined castle. The auditory imagery is extremely vivid. The wind moaned and whistled through the rocks, the branches crashed, the baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer. Following this dramatic atmosphere resounding with noises from nature, a momentary absence of any sound proves to have an even more terrifying effect on Harker and the horses. It is when a ring of wolves surrounds the caleche, looking 100 times more terrible in the grim silence, even when they howled. Harker shouts to scare the wolves away, but the driver, however, undisturbed by the noises or the silence, raises his voice in a tone of imperious command. Harker experiences a series of disturbing emotions, culminating with his feeling as if paralyzed. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. Following this brief analysis on the first chapter, we notice that it abounds in visual and auditory imagery that work together and mingle with the organic, kinesthetic, and tactile mostly, and in two instances with the gustatory one too. Auditory imagery is intensely and effectively involved in creating a sense of distress, anxiety, and terror more than the visual imagery. Sounds and not images foreshadow the most dramatic moments in the narrative. In fact, Scotland skillfully uses sound and silence to create tension and to immerse the reader in the story. Various sounds can also make sense, depending on the hearer's perception. As part of auditory imagery, music is mentioned 9 times using the term musical, and several times suggested by the use of music-related terms like song, singing, sang, tune, chorus, humming. The first instance takes place shortly after the Count introduces himself, when in the general stillness around, the howling of many wolves is heard. It is the moment when, with gleaming eyes, the Count utters two of his most famous lines. Listen to them, the children of the night, what music they make. What for a simple mortal like Harker sounds terrifying, for Dracula represents music, therefore pleasure and control. From Stoker's notes, we find that vampires are insensitive to man-produced music. So given the previous quote, the conclusion is that Dracula finds pleasure in natural sounds like those produced by winds, the wolves, wolves or by winds, the trees, wolves or other animals like bats or owls. I was thinking of my previous slide. Sounds that contribute to the eerie and foreboding atmosphere and that highlight the supernatural and disquieting nature of Dracula's presence and the events surrounding him. The sound of Dracula's voice itself adds to his allure and menace. The foreign and seductive tone of his voice make him a charismatic figure, while his harsh, metallic whisper make the howling wolves react to his command as a great orchestra under the baton of the conductor. Moreover, the use of voices recorded on the phonograph enhances the eeriness of atmosphere. The Count's appearance in the entranceway of his castle is anticipated in the case of the driver by a series of strong, harsh sounds, but of a different origin. A heavy step, rattling chains, clanking of massive bolts drawn back, the grating noise of blowing is used, all meant to produce emotional discomfort. Count welcomes Harker using excellent English, but with a strange intonation. 3 times that the Count greet Harker courteously, though somehow warningly, using rather bizarre words. Welcome to my house. Freely, come freely, go safely, and live something of the happiness you bring. I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Predictably, the next and probably the most momentous experience of Count Dracula, that of his arrival in England and the beginning of his conquering of a new land, is again anticipated by auditory imagery, which in this case make up an ample concert of the nature. The thick fog impeded sight and left available to men only the organ of hearing. Accompanied by this unseen orchestra producing light roars, crashes of thunder and booming of the billows, the ship Demeter, carrying the vampire, enters the port of Whitby gloriously. I think I have it. Sorry. Here. Okay. Well, imagery, as literary device in general, and auditory imagery in particular, can create, as demonstrated, an atmosphere of suspense, tension, and dread throughout a piece of Gothic fiction, but can serve other purposes too: foreshadowing, characterization, producing psychological and emotional effects. It involves the readers in the story, allowing them to live multisensory experiences that sense danger and suspense, and engages them with the supernatural world of the story. And I can say that in the shadow of sound, much of the eerie atmosphere is
Thank you so much for your presentation. Congratulations. It was very, like you said at the start, no matter how many times I read Dracula, I always find a way to reread it in a new conceptual light. And I never thought about smells in Dracula. Now I'm going to have to reread the book. just to get those like the smellscapes, like you're saying. So congratulations. I thought it was a fantastic idea to look at it at that particular angle. However, are there any questions online or in the actual room in relation to the presentation?
So in your research, which of the senses proved to be more dominant in the novel? Is there any of the senses perhaps being more important than others?
To me, from what I have studied so far, I tend to say that the auditory imagery is above the others, with this effect that has on building the terror, the atmosphere of horror and terror. There are many instances when dramatic happenings, moments are anticipated by sounds. So I would say that this is the first. So it appeals to our hearing. Well, imaginary hearing.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, there's no further questions. We can move on to the next presentation. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce any names or any university names. However, we have Ildiko Limpar, who is an associate professor at the Pázmány Péter Catholic University in Budapest, and her research interest lies in the fantastic and the monstrous, and she is going to be presenting Blood is the Life, Vampirism and Religious Fanaticism in the Midnight Mass.
Thank you so much. And as you can see, the title of my presentation actually suggests that the vampire I'm looking at in Midnight Mass has something to do with the Dracula phenomenon, which is of course true. There are a lot of connections between the Dracula narrative and Midnight Mass that I'm going to talk about, but actually I'm not going to talk directly about this connection. Instead, I'm going to talk about vampirism and religious fanaticism. And let's see how this works. Sorry, I need to I was focusing on the relationship between the body and the soul, actually, in this. Why is that? Because ever since the vampire figure appeared on the literary scene, it has been examined in the context of Christianity, as this form of the revenant monster calls for interpretations that address questions of the soul, as well as the phenomenon of resurrection and eternal life after life. Parallelly with this approach, the vampire body has also become a focused topic in vampire studies in the past few decades, especially in relation to the vampire lover in supernatural and interspecies romances. Netflix's Midnight Mass from 2021 presents a new take on the vampire lore when it combines a special interest in the body in an extremely religious context. The proposed paper argues that the newly interpreted revenant embodies the menace fundamentalism threatens people with, and it presents evil as a nearly unstoppable spreading infection that roots in the inability of interpreting signs and phenomena correctly as a result of indoctrination, and that the show makes this signification visible by focusing on the presentation of the body on various levels, so not just the corporeal body. So what is the context of the movie? Let me just sum up a little bit for those who are not familiar with this, well, not movie, but TV series. This is a limited TV series running on Netflix. And it's a peculiar story of Crockett Island, which begins with a physical journey and the corporeal transformation. Actually, this image that you can see right now is not from the beginning, but it's from the third episode, if I'm not mistaken, because the beginning of the story is actually seen and narrated from retrospect. Okay, so this is the root of the problem, let's put it this way, but we don't start with the root actually in the narration. This very old and Senai priest that you can see, this bearded character, comes from Crockett Island and leader of the island's Catholic community, and he's called Monsignor Pruitt. And he is sent on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land by his congregation. When he is lost there, he finds refuge in a cave where he's attacked by a terrifying winged creature. This is the other character that you can see in this image. And you can see a little bit on the left the wings as well of this character, a part of the wing. And this winged creature sucks the blood out of the priest and then feeds him with his own blood. Okay, so this is a classical vampire motif. Next day, the priest wakes up restored, young and healthy. He interprets this as God's miracle carried out by his angel and decides to share this miracle with his community. He returns to the village, and in a locked wooden case, he takes the vampire with him too. All this, however, is revealed, as I said, in the third episode, in a flashback. The people of Crockett Island are not aware of these events. The rejuvenated priest claims to have come in the place of Monsignor Pruitt, who is said to be in the hospital on the mainland. Now, there are a lot of components of the narrative that link directly to the religious context that makes it a very rich material. Okay, the first one is setting, and I'm going to look at place first. It's set in a small and impoverished fishing village, Crockett Island, where fishermen cannot make a decent living anymore, as there was a big oil spill in the area. So this is a biblical parallel. Monsignor Pruitt comes as a Jesus-like character to the community of fishers who become his apostles and will fish, or rather hunt, for people in the end, because they will all become vampires at the end of the narrative due to the priest's dark actions, making community people drink the blood of the vampire that he takes with him. Okay, there are also two other important locations to be mentioned, because it's not simply the island which is important, but of course much of the action takes place actually in the church that was built on the island. And there is one more important building, and this is the community house. And why this is important is because there is a character, Bev Kane. I'm going to talk about her a little bit later. And she's the one who collected money for this community house. It's really a very important project to her. But how this place was built, how this building was built, was that he took money from the members of the community as a kind of gift or reward, because she made a sealed deal with the oil company that caused all the problems to these fishermen. Okay, so actually she extracted money from these people, and it also shows how important to this character, the body and not the soul, the Catholic Church benefited from the deal made with the company. This is why it was have to be sealed by Bev, a devout member of the church. So it's not, it's a very materialistic drive that we can see here. There is another component, of course, of the setting which we must look at, and that's time. The series proposes two timelines. The diegetic time, that is the time of the narrated events, which runs parallelly with the symbolic time. This is made visible by how the series utilizes biblical allusions. All the titles of the 7 episodes name a book in the Bible, and each episode incorporates allusions to the eponymous books in their scenes, turning them into an integral part of the story. The first episode title, Genesis, alludes to the beginning of a new world brought to the village by its priest. The world reaches its apocalyptic climax in the last episode, which appropriately references the book of Revelation. In between these two endpoints, the story unfolds in the holiest period of the liturgical year, from Ash Wednesday to Easter, which suggests a curious parallel between the events related to the biggest miracle of Christianity, Christ's death and resurrection, and the most feared events described in the scripture, which is the apocalypse. And indeed, the whole narrative turns out to be a horroristic subversion of the Christian resurrection narrative, in which Christ's blood is replaced by the blood of a vampiric monster, which, if consumed, changes the person, and if the person dies, resurrects him as a hungry vampire. Now, let's see what connections are there between the Easter narrative and the apocalypse. So I must say a few words about the premise of the whole limited series. The Catholic interpretation of the Eucharist, which symbolically repeats the key event of the Last Supper, holds that via transubstantiation, the bread and the wine of the Holy Communion becomes the flesh and blood of Christ, who comes to enlighten and strengthen the believer by nourishing his soul for eternal life. The Catholic interpretation, when looked at from a non-theological perspective, evokes the famous quote from Dracula, "Blood is the life." This association suggests vampirism, the consummation of a supreme being's blood to gain an eternal life. And it also includes the prerequisites of resurrection for gaining eternal life. So the parallel is pretty close. It is a monster narrative, as the blood is to resurrect and then keep alive the soulless, bloodthirsty body, whereas Christ's blood is to transform the spirit that will not need body in the end. Hence, the monstrous interpretation is based on superficial similarities with the Catholic one and twists the original meaning. Instead of presenting a narrative of hope and spiritual revival, it presents a story of damnation, the exact opposite of what the Evangelium teaches. It is not a Christ narrative, but an antichrist narrative, which takes us right to the apocalyptic narrative. Well, let's look at how deception is presented, because this is in close relationship how we should see this as an apocalyptic narrative. Now, Father Paul seems to bring a spiritual revival to the village after he is seen to perform what appears to be a miracle. As he keeps mixing the vampire blood in the communion wine, people who take the Holy Sacrament experience wondrous revitalization, healing. Glasses become needless. A painful back will be no longer an impediment to moving freely and even dancing. The priest's former secret lover becomes young as she receives the Holy Communion every day. Most spectacularly, Father Paul, this is the name that Monsignor Prout takes when he comes back in a rejuvenated form. So Father Paul heals the teenage Lisa, who got paralyzed after a shooting accident. While the immediate effect of these so-called miracles seem to be positive, with the Catholic community experiencing a spiritual revival, the longer-lasting consequences are catastrophic, which in themselves question the nature of these wondrous phenomena. The wondrous events accentuate the already existing dividing lines within the community. The second phase of the miraculous transformation is death, which leads to the resurrection of what remains of the human, the monster, the vampire, whose hunger for human blood is unsatisfiable. What happens is based on lies and serves to keep up a deception. which lies in harmony with what is predicted about false miracles of the apocalypse, as described in the Revelation. Now let's look at those. The Bible clearly differentiates between miracles and magic and warns against the latter as it comes from demonic power. In the scripture, magic is recurrently associated with the Antichrist and the false prophet. Thessalonians 2:9 describes the Antichrist as a lawless one, whose coming will be in accordance with how the Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie. The false prophet is associated with the Antichrist. According to Revelation, the false prophet will perform miracles that are very much like God's. This is to deceive people, so he conceals his own nature. He is the second beast Revelation describes, saying it had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. This description suggests a meek and modest, humble disguise that hides a predator. This description fits Monsignor Prout, or Father Paul, who comes as a spiritual leader but builds his whole performance on lies, which he confesses in advance. This is the scene where we actually learn about the beginnings of this story. He brings the winged, blood-sucking beast to the community, and the arrival of these 2 on the island brings about the apocalypse, the very first sign of which is the countless dead bodies of white cats on the seashore the night after the arrival. Monsignor Prout does the work of the false prophet, and the creature he calls an angel of God seems to be an equivalent of the Antichrist. Now, why does the deception works? And here I just put a quote from the series. Elisa is the girl who is healed from her paralysis, and this is her father saying it aloud. It feels wrong, doesn't it, to interrogate a miracle, second guess a gift from God. Okay, where does such an attitude come from? While everyone focuses on the improvements of people's physical condition, the healing or revitalization of the body, they fail to question its source, and they in fact turn away from reason and science, not to appear as unthankful and unworthy. This mentality highlights the difference between the Christian miracle believers and those who believe in science, like the local doctor, or those who have a different faith, like the Muslim sheriff. As the parishioners want to prove their worthiness and faith, they lose their analytical and hence critical faculties and become completely manipulatable, whereas Catholic teachings lay emphasis on the importance of doubt in these cases. The most frightening example of the doubtless mind is the most devout person of the church, Bev Kane, who feels entitled to make judgment about other people and enjoys acting like God, deciding who deserves salvation and who punishment or even damnation. I put together a few names to show her trajectory. She is presented first as a very pious, devout Catholic. Then she's the one who says, okay, whatever it takes. So if it includes really dark things, then it's for the greater good. And then you can see how her look is even monstrous after a while, having all these bloody stains all over her body as she's involved in these monstrous acts. But she's still someone who claims that she is not there to judge others. And then you can see her absolutely monstrous outbursts when she condemns the whole village to be burned, at least the people who did not turn to vampires because they were not righteous enough. Okay, so the most frightening example of this doubtless mind is the most devout person of the church, Bev, I said. And now, due to her cardinal sin, pride, she shows no guilt, accomplice in murder, because she cannot imagine that she may be wrong in decisions, as her faith is as strong as rock. as she does not even doubt her moral righteousness. She accepts every horrible consequence of these so-called miracles and finds a verse from the Bible to make sense of it and justify the horror in the name of the greater good. Since Beth believes in Father Paul's miracle, she is quick to quote the Bible in order to convince two parishioners to have the body of Job, the bloodthirsty priest, cured. That's the spirit of the word. She's focused on the surface and never on depth, so she's aptly introduced by her criticizing Father Paul for not choosing the rite choseable for the first Mass he was to deliver for the community. She is preoccupied with seeming. Therefore, what seems miraculous easily turns her into the most monstrous character in the village, who dooms nearly everyone to death. Okay, let's see how this creates a framework to for interpreting this kind of monster that we have in this narrative. When the angel of God is invited into the community, this is this vampire, apocalypse promptly escalates. People are convinced to commit suicide in order to resurrect. Whoever resists will be food for the newly turned monsters. The monsters, as we could see, is an antichrist character, and as such, it uses the tempting power of the Satan. But those who are turned behave differently. Some succumb immediately to the evil, while others are able to resist the temptation of killing others. It works just as Catholic teaching teaches about sin. Catholic theology teaches about sin. The Satan influence. So you can see here two characters, and they are like counterexamples of those vampire monsters, because the man you see was turned into a vampire, but decides to burn in the sunset, not to hurt others. Whereas the other character does everything to save others, and she sacrifices herself in the end. This shows that the fact that there is a massive massacre in the end and only a few of the newly turned vampires resist the urge to kill communicates something about the fallibility of human nature. It warns us that blind faith is not strong faith, but a monstrous one. One with a blind faith is like a newly turned vampire. He instinctively hurts and respects no other lives, not even the lives of the once beloved friends or family members. The treatment of the biblical heritage as a blasphemous vampire narrative criticizes an engagement with the scripture and the sacred that focuses on the literal meaning, the body of the text, that is, as opposed to the spirit of the Bible, which is also reflected in the focus on the physical metamorphosis as a prerequisite of blind faith and as a motive that will bring complete moral and physical annihilation to the community. Vampirism suggests a new life after death and resurrection, but in fact it brings about an existence in which kindness, the emotional spiritual aspect of human existence, is lost. This vampire as a monster signals deception, manipulation, and how it may lead to an apocalyptic turn in our society if hypocrisy is allowed to become a major power in our world. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was very enlightening as well. And I just wanted to say I particularly like the way how you connected the midnight mass with Dracula. We were actually having this conversation yesterday about connecting the Eucharist and the in particular the wine representing the blood of Christ and how that could be seen as a form of vampirism. So it was quite interesting how you brought that up today. However, are there any other questions in the room or online or?
Yeah, let me just get into the camera. Ildiko, congratulations on your presentation. We didn't have anyone talking about Midnight Mass before you, and I was wondering why, because it's such a great production. So it's not so much echo I'm not commenting on your research because that was excellent, very interesting, but I have a question. So what made you take up this particular film? Of course the subject is perfect and the way you connected it, but what made you decide to choose this film? Because I think that it went unnoticed, even though people watch it, it's just not mentioned enough, and it's such a wonderful film. Serious,
Yeah,
isn't it?
actually, I took part in this conference last year, and I didn't bring this topic because I thought that everybody would be speaking about it because it was such a fresh and, very powerful presentation. So I thought that definitely I'm going to talk about it this year. Also, you noticed I'm from Pázmány Péter Catholic University. So religion in a fantastic narrative is, well, I don't have to research this, but it has become kind of a special theme that I'm interested in, because now I see quite a number of narratives that link to these themes in a very new manner. So I'm not so much interested in the recycling of the very old, but recycling with a twist is very interesting, and I think this narrative does it.
Yeah.
And it speaks, like religious fundamentalism and fanaticism is there, but actually this opens up to interpretations of many other things. As I mentioned, there are lots of links between the Dracula narrative and this one, so that's one thing to explain and to explore. There is another thing, is a kind of Eden narrative as well, with this ending with the apocalypse, but having a new start at the end, but on a burned down island, which speaks to me a lot in terms of the Anthropocene as well, and how not interpreting science, not paying attention to science, actually brought us to the verge of an environmental catastrophe, with the climate crisis and with all related catastrophic threats. So I think this limited series is actually about much more than what one's relation to religion or misinterpretation of religion can do to a community. It speaks on a very general level about what ignorance and the rejection of seeing and interpreting science can do to a community and do to a whole world, because obviously the island, especially in fantastic narratives, metaphorically stand for a whole world. But it's easy to see this kind of parallel between what's going on in the island and how that is a threat to the whole world. I didn't speak about it, but if you saw the narrative, you know that stopping the monster is necessary, because if they don't, it can fly to the mainland and the other vampires can go to the mainland and this infection will spread. Okay, so this is kind of symbolic of what's going on, I think, in our world right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much. That's fascinating. Yeah, and just to add a comment that it's the series is very, it has a lot of respect and reverence towards the classic. Well, I'm talking about film, series, TV production, film element, but at the same time, it's very modern. So I think it's one of the better productions I think that's appeared over the last several years. So I'm thinking that there is hope. And there is hope for really good productions still. Okay, thank you so much. That was really brilliant. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else? No? All right, thank you very much once again. That was great, but we'll have to move on to the next presenter, who is Chloe Hammond, and she's a writer from the UK. And just a brief little bit about Chloe. She wrote this book, Darkly Dazzling, and how it came about is quite interesting. In order to deal with the pandemic and various other issues in her life, she's created these monsters and creatures and help her to process these events. And I think it's a fascinating take on how to cope with stress and all these other issues people were facing during the pandemic. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Chloe to come and present her book, Darkly Dazzling.
Thank you very much. Just checking, can you hear me all right?
Hear you loud and clear.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, thanks to Magdalena and her team for organising this fabulous Congress again this year. So today I'm doing a reading.
Thank you for being with us, Chloe. Chloe was with us last year and presented some of her prose already, and that was met with great enthusiasm. So we decided to invite her back this year as well.
Thank you. So this year I'm going to be reading a section from Darkly Dazzling, which is brand new, just been finished. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the setting because otherwise I'm going to give spoilers away, because this is the third book in the Darkly Vampire trilogy. So this year's reading actually focuses on Layla, who is the main character's best friend. I'm just going to tell you that the friends are infected with a vampire virus, and they've struggled with the dark drives that the virus brings. And they've made enemies through their rejection of a lot of the vampire society. So now we join them in the High Council's sloths, in severe danger for their lives. David and I make love, a tender, all-encompassing, mutual apology, a bonding which opens doors in me I didn't know were there. Afterwards, I lie cradled in his arms, but all too soon, the death-like vampire sleep reaches up and snatches him away from me. It is so still, so intense, so unlike human sleep, without twitches, mumbles, or snores, that I am left lonely. I'm tempted to prod him awake to reassure myself we are real. Instead, I get up and go and stand by the window again, thinking. David needs many hours of this sleep, deep, restorative sleep. He needs to recover from his tension since Megan found us. But now that I've decided I'm going to help Ray, I don't think I can keep still that long. I don't know how I can help, but being locked away in here definitely isn't going to achieve anything. We haven't actually been told we are prisoners. We were officially referred to as guests, even if our treatment belies those words. By my reasoning, this means we're okay to have a wander around, see what we can find out, as long as we don't make any attempt to leave the premises. If anyone asks what we're up to, we can claim hunger. Indeed, it won't be a lie, I am ravenous. All the way back to the sloths, Megan would only allow us to stop for one meal. Typically, she and Antoine insisted on eating a farm hand, while David and I only sipped on some cows. Eventually, I can't keep still anymore. I clatter around to wake David up. I feel mean when he jerks awake and leaps to his feet in one fear-fueled movement, but I need him with me to go exploring. I whisper my idea to him as I tow him through the corridors until we find our way out through the front hall. There are vampires everywhere, but none of them give us a second glance until we get out into the collection of farm buildings, tucked to the side and slightly behind the sloths. The central yard is filled with vehicles. We are met here by a cheery red-haired vampire who hails us enthusiastically, not at all what we were expecting in Abigail's court. Are you Layla, Ray's friend? I nod cautiously. Eric, pleased to meet you. Have you seen her? I need to ask about these new cows. Do I put them straight in with the others or keep them separate for a bit? He rubs his chin thoughtfully, then comes to a decision. Do you know, I'll just keep them separate for now. I can always mix them later. There's a bull in here there. I'm not sure Ray will want all the heifers pregnant at one go. Well, lovely meeting you. I'll be off. Give my best to Ray when you see her. And he's gone. I'm completely thrown. I tiptoed out here, filled with adrenaline, primed to fight for my life at any moment, ready to discover terrible secrets. Instead, I'm accosted with talk of animal husbandry. Had I imagined the fear in Ray's eyes? Was she scared of slipping the rest of the way down the wall of the sloth? Deflated, I took David out of the way of the line of Frisians that the flame-haired vampire is driving from the back of one of the cattle trucks. I wonder if we can bother him for a snack, but decide against it. There's bound to be more animals in the barns, and they are more likely to be for eating. There's a big padlock on the barn door, which surprises me, but I suppose they have to ensure Abigail's court don't just help themselves to the livestock. Controlling the food source is an important way of controlling a population. Well, tough, because I'm starving and I don't like being controlled. I nudge David with my elbow. He steps forward, yanks the padlock off, and pushes the door open. Immediately, I realise we found some of those terrible secrets I was expecting and dreading. The smell is like nothing I've ever experienced before. It's a combination of high, sweet, rotting flesh, earwax, a severe athlete's foot infection, battery acid, and feces. At the same time as the wall of stench hits us, stealing our breath away, a cacophony of sound engulfs us. A wave of snarling, screeching, howling, and gnashing of teeth, accompanied by the rapid rattling of chains and chiming of claws on cage bars. For a frozen second of pure shock, I fight down the desire to turn and run and never stop running. Then I brace my shoulders and step into the barn, pulling David behind me, turning back to close the door. I'm confident we're not supposed to be in here. There are large dog-style crates chained together and stacked 3 high, hundreds of them, row upon row, tier upon tier. They are sturdier than dog crates, welded from steel, and they need to be. Each one contains a frenetic creature from my worst nightmare, which is trying its best to break free. Rooted to the spot, gawping for long moments, David and I wait until we are confident they can't escape their captivity. Then we start to walk slowly up and down the narrow gaps between the rows, staring into each cage, repulsed and bewildered. It takes a while to work out that these naked creatures used to be human. They are so twisted and gnarled, crouching on all fours, ribs heaving, hip bones jutting through paper grey flesh, oozing pus from stinking, crusted sores. They scrape and bang against their captivity in a vague, disassociated manner until we approach their cages. Then they become infected with an animalistic energy, flinging themselves against the bars, straining frantically against the chains stretched taut from their large metal collars, bolted around their welted throats to the hoops screwed into the walls behind the cage. They only have sparse, pale clusters of dead-looking hair interspersed with scabbed sores. Their contorted faces retain little humanity. Their jaws are twisted, teeth extended and meshed, reminding me a little of how Ray looks while in the rage. I realise of a start who they remind me of, Hermes, but without the Egyptian vampire's guile and cunning. These creatures seem to be trapped in continual rage, with no cognitive ability at all. They smell even worse than armors too. It's only when they leap and scrabble at the cage fronts that their split and festering claws chafing against the chains which pull them upright that we can tell which are the tom and which are the queens from their withered genitals. No other physical features remain to tell them apart. One hand over our mouths and noses, our others tightly clasped together, David and I wind our way between them, utterly appalled. There is no doubt that these creatures want to rip us to pieces. While I'm confident I could fight off a few and David could defeat several, if dozens were released together in a horde, these creatures would quickly overwhelm us and destroy us. What are these? Why? Who? What? The questions spin through my mind. I see them reflected in David's face beneath the repulsion. We can't speak, though, because the tumultuous noise the creatures make drowns out all but the loudest shout. Neither of us feel like dragging that much stench into our lungs, just to verbalize what is so blatantly obvious. I keep expecting to be accosted by guards at any moment and asked to account for our presence. But no one comes, so we keep walking deeper into the barn. At the very back, we come across a few quieter cages, holding more sickly creatures. They still hiss and spit as we pass, but they're lacking the strength of the rest of the rabble. Right in the corner, I catch sight of a pale, hunched figure, its bony back to us, which seems the weakest of them all. It doesn't even snarl at us as we approach, just squats, trembling at the back of its cage, oblivious to our presence. I step closer to its cage than I've dared with the others, and startled, it spins towards me. Finally, it spits and snarls at us, but without any vigor. It reminds me of an exhausted, terrified, and intensely ugly kitten. When I don't move away, it sniffles the air and shuffles slightly forward on its haunches, and I realize it's a small queen. Very slowly, I reach a finger through the barbs towards her. David tries to yank my hand back, but I shoot him a glare, and he lets me go, but remains standing tense beside me. At David's sudden movement, she scurries back into a corner, and I have to wait for her to move forward again. I stand resolutely still, eyes glued to hers as she edges forward. I might be wrong, but it seems there's slightly more colour in her irises, so her eyes are the palest grey rather than the bleak chalk white of the other creatures. She's kept a rag of cloth, maybe the remains of a t-shirt, around her neck and over one shoulder. Her bone-thin fingers worry and fret continually at its curled hem. Suddenly, her head shoots forward and she bites my finger. It's so sudden that I jump and squeak, then curse myself as she scuttles back to the far corner of her cage again, turning her back to me, shoulder curved in a flinch. The other creatures around us have watched intently, and now they set up even more of a hullabaloo, flinging themselves against their cages and howling. When the blow she's expecting doesn't fall, she peeps back over her shoulder and blinks to see me there with my hand still extended. Her eyes flick once to David, standing scowling beside me, so I gently push him back a step or two with my spare hand. She's quicker this time, and although her eyes scan continuously between my face and hand, she edges back to me. I stand stock still as her corpse-cold fingers take hold of my finger, and the sharp little teeth pierce my flesh. She sucks my blood with ravenous enthusiasm, and to my amazement, I can see the effect on her immediately. It would be too much to say she blooms with the blood, but her chalky, cracked skin plumps slightly, and the worst of her festering sores heal to scabs. To my annoyance, David slowly steps closer again, and she stops feeding to fix him with her guarded gaze. But with infinite slowness, he slides his fingers through the bars of the cage beside mine, and my heart fills with such love for him, I almost can't breathe. She cautiously leans forward and bites his finger, eyes closing in bliss as his warm blood fills her mouth. All around us, the others bay and howl jealously, but I'm transfixed by her little hand still on mine, her bony thumb softly caressing my knuckles. I can't leave her here. At the same moment the thought strikes me, David reaches out with his spare hand and lifts the padlock that locks the chains around her cage and starts prizing it apart. I pat his arm and shake my head. It's no use releasing her, not until we have somewhere to take her. I'm sure Ray will know of some hidden corner and the quietest time to sneak her out. Satiated, the little creature has stopped feeding, her concave stomach now bloated beneath her narrow ribs. She rubs her cheek once against my fingers and then crawls to her corner at the back of the cage and curls into a ball, hardly shivering at all. To my adapted eyes, she almost looks like the child she was. I leave David back out of the barn, trying not to think about just how many hundreds of the creatures must be in those cages, desperately shrieking at us as we pass. Is each one a teenager? It's too overwhelming to consider. I wonder where I can find Ray, where to even start looking. Who can I ask? As David furtively closes the barn behind us, attempting to disguise the broken padlock, I realise we were in there for longer than I'd thought. The sky is brighter, and the chatter of the birds' chorus fills the air. Such a contrast to the noise inside the barn that it makes my ears ring. Then I notice why it's so quiet out here. There's a distinct lack of vampires around the farmyard in comparison to the bustling scene when we slipped in. I feel unease stir. Part of me wants to run back in and rescue the little queen while it's quiet and we can sneak her away unseen. But the larger part worries why the busy milling scene of vampires has evaporated. Let's go and find that redhead who had the cows. Eric, I suggest to David. He seems to know Ray well. Hopefully he'll be able to tell us where to find her. David nods distractedly. He's back to shaking with fear again, and that scares me even more. We need to find something to eat too, I chatter. He doesn't even nod this time, just carries on scanning every corner and peering around each vehicle we pass. I take his hand and squeeze his fingers. We leave the farmyard, passing into a lane that cuts through the edge of the woodland, leading us towards fields that twinkle with frost in the weak dawn light. I spot Eric standing in the gateway to a field, one hand on the open gate, the other on the gatepost. He has his back to us and is kicking a tussock of grass, shoulders humped up to his ears. Hi, I call. He doesn't respond. Hey, excuse me, Eric, I shout louder. We're looking for Ray. Have you seen her? The face he turns to me makes my blood run cold. You didn't see? He asks. Didn't hear? Oh God, that monster Sebastian took her. He's done something to her. I've never seen anything like it in all my years. Never heard anything like the noise she was making. His eyes fill with garnet tears. Just like that, the bottom drops out of my world. I feel everything tilt, then spin. I can't believe what he's telling me. She's dead, I stutter. I hope so for her sake. I bloody hope so. I've never seen a vampire in pain like that. I don't think I've ever even seen a human in pain like that in all my centuries as a soldier. David wraps his arm tight around me and rubs my shoulder. But when I look up at his face in response to his touch, he's concentrating, looking around, scoping out an escape route. If they know about Ray's plan and have killed her for it, we will be next. But she's not definitely dead. I resist the tug of David on my arm, trying to pull me away towards the forest. At that moment, the phone in my back pocket starts to vibrate, making me jump with fright. Ray and Guilherme are the only ones that know about this number. The only ones who even know I have a phone. I fumble in my rush to answer, frowning when I see it's a number I don't recognise. Oh, please don't let it be some call centre trying to sell me life insurance. I beg the universe. Hello? My voice quivers on the brink of tears. I have a message, a brusque human voice informs me in German. I stare at David in confusion. Human? Ray needs your help urgently. You must take water, gallons of water. She's covered in something that is burning her, and blood. She needs blood. Where is she? I ask, hardly hearing what else he has said. I will text you the location and the address of someone you can kill for her. Someone bad. Wait, what? It's no good. He's hung up. He's gone. I stand stunned for a long moment, staring at my phone until the screen lights up with first one text, then another. The first is the location marker, and I realise that it's where Ray is. My impulse is to run to her immediately, but then I remember what the man said. She needs us to take water and blood. Did you hear what he said? I asked David and Eric. They both nod. Will you help? I ask Eric. I see the horror in David's eyes, but this is a time for taking a chance, and Eric was plainly devastated by what he'd seen. Anyway, all we were doing is rescuing an injured friend. There's nothing wrong with that. We haven't been told not to. Give me the address for the meal, Eric says, and the location of where she is. I'll meet you there. There's a stack of big 35-litre jerry cans in the back of the hangar, beside the barn where the cows are kept. You can fill them with the tap on the side of the cowshed. Try not to be seen, though. The less questions, the better. This warning from Eric raises my eyebrows. Is this him clearly stating his alliance to Ray, or just him trying to avoid getting into trouble? Either way, it pleases me. It takes David and I half an hour to fill the water canisters and run through the woodland, carrying 2 each, until we find the spot the German man had sent me. Initially, I can't see any sign of her, and my stomach twists, wondering if this is a cruel trap. David is already wheeling away, dropping his water and dragging me behind him. Ray, I call forlornly. I'm convinced Sebastian has been back and finished her off in the time it took us to get here. Is he even now waiting to pounce on us? I can't help giving one call, despite David's furious hushes. Layla? The shriek is gummy and mispronounced, but unmistakably Ray. I break from David's grip and run in the direction of her call to a narrow crevice in the ground. Despite David's attempt to grab me and hold me back, I kneel and peer in. What I see is too awful to contemplate. Ray lies in a stinking pool of her own melted flesh. Bone and muscle show through her skin in various stages of healing. Her eye lies on her cheek. Her teeth are scattered and extended from the rage and the effect of whatever the foul liquid is that's all over her, causing this destruction. I realise with horror that neither David nor the water canisters are going to fit through the opening to the pit she's in. I'm going to have to drop in by myself and try and get as much of her back together as I can before passing her up to David. We pour some of the water through the gap so it can run down and wash over her, taking most of the stinking gunge with it. Then I drop in and squat beside her. I'm sickened by what I see, but I tenderly scrape the gooey remains of her eyeball back into her eye socket. The thick black ooze that is still on her face burns my fingers horribly, making me hiss with pain. As I scrape back what remains of her hair and scalp, I'm torn between being slow and gentle with her and rushing to get her away from here. I've got no idea what Sebastian used to do this to her, but I don't doubt he'll be back any minute with more. Ray is wrapped in something sticky and resilient that resists my attempts to uncover her. I can only tear apart the outer areas where the acidic gunge has pooled, but I quickly realise I'm better leaving her bound until I can get her out of this cave. We need her to be laid on a level surface before we risk rinsing her with the rest of the water. I have a sickening feeling she might completely disintegrate in the manoeuvres of getting her out of the narrow entry point if I unwrap her in here. Instead, I set about unravelling just enough of the sticky strands to be able to chuck a loop of it up to David so he can pull while I push. Then I tie the rest together as best I can, so she's contained in a shroud of the fibres, ready for us to hoist her out. I'm determinedly trying to ignore the burning wherever the substance touches me. Even so, I have to keep stopping so David can splash water over my stinging flesh. While I work, Ray is muttering and lisping incoherently in her delirium. I slide my hands under her, attempting to lift her, while David leans through the gap as far as he can. He's straining to hoist her up to a point where he can catch hold of her properly. She lets out a soul-rendering scream that jolts tears to my eyes. I understand what Eric meant. Slipping my hands underneath Ray pushes my arms into the undiluted acid that's pooled under her. The acid eats through my clothes in seconds and burns into my flesh, making me snarl in pain. But Ray hovers in the air above my head, so I just have to persevere. Then the strand David is pulling her up with snaps, and David has to make a grab for her arm to avoid her crashing back to the floor. To our utter horror, he pulls the flesh off her arms and over her hands, degloving her. I can see it takes everything he possesses to reach back in to grab hold of the naked muscle and pull her upwards. She screams in utter agony until he can secure a handful of webbing with his other hand. Finally, he can haul her up and out and into the light. I leap up and follow behind her into the fresh, cooling air. I try not to stir while he resolutely unfurls the flesh back up her arms like tattered opera gloves, determined to give her some chance of healing. He pours most of the remaining water over the ground beside her, rinsing her, but avoiding hitting her poor exposed flesh with any force. You need to wait here for Eric, David says. He's pushing the final half a container of water towards me with his foot as he cradles Ray in his arms. I grab the water and rinse the burning slime off me, looking ruefully at my destroyed clothing. I'll run Ray to the lake. It's only a couple of miles from here. As soon as Eric gets here, bring him. She's going to need a lot of blood to heal. But Layla, if you see the slightest sign of Sebastian, run. I nod once, then he's off, running through the trees with Ray sobbing in his arms. I flatten the water carriers and hide them in the cave so Sebastian wouldn't be able to spot them, their white shapes from a distance, and know immediately that Ray is gone. The soggy ground will be a giveaway as soon as he gets close, but there's nothing I can do about that now. After a few minutes of waiting, jumping at every rustling leaf, I decide it's safer to climb a tree so I can keep a lookout for Sebastian. I shin up the tallest tree in the area. This way, I hope I can spot his copper curls from a distance and take off before he spots me. The fact both Toms are redheads worries me a little, but I'm pretty confident I can tell the difference between Sebastian's new copper penny locks and Eric's dried bracken thatch. From my perch in the treetops, I scan the horizon, but I can't see any movement at all. I eye the huge rock that has gouged the earth in a short path from the mouth of the pit where Ray was. I wonder if I could push it back over the hole after Sebastian jumps down into it looking for her. David could have, but I decide it's too dangerous a chance for me to take alone. I can't be sure he'll jump straight in. He might just look in first and see she's not there. Then I will have sacrificed my small advantage of distance to escape him. It seems to take forever before I spot Eric's red hair bobbing through the bare trees towards me. The first glimpse of his red locks through the naked branches does make my heart stop, but the tantalizing scent of human confirms it's Eric who approaches. I scan the horizon one last time to make sure there's no sign of Sebastian or anyone else from Abigail's court approaching. Then I drop down to the ground and call for Eric to follow me as I take off towards the lake. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. That was how you managed to, I guess, put all these characters together in that book and turn something negative into positive is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you very much.
So are there any comments, any questions from in the room or online?
I just wanted to comment. Thank you very much for presenting this bit of prose. So is it like a new book? Is it already published?
It's not actually published yet. It's with the publishers. They're doing their final edits and it should be released soon.
So we're getting an exclusive part of the...
You are. This is like snapshot. Nobody else has seen it yet.
Thank you so very much.
I would have said that earlier if I knew. Sorry about that.
That was very enjoyable. And is that the third one in the series? Am I correct?
Yeah, that's the final in the trilogy. So this is where everything happens.
Okay, so we'll look forward.
I'm going to get a signed copy, by the way.
You have to try.
Yeah. I said I'm going to have to get you to get me a signed copy, by the way.
Sent to Australia. Yeah, we all look for the book to be published because, as you probably know, most of us are nerds here, and we like to have our books in our hands with signed by the author. Thank you so much. It's not enough, but at least we've just heard this bit, and I'm pretty sure I'll be posting the links to, as soon as it's published, we'll be posting the links in our group so people can.
I will let you know as soon as I've got a release date.
Thank you very much. So
you want to keep going? Or you sure? Any other questions or comments online? Okay, well, on that note, we're going to have a bit of a coffee break, I think, after this for about half an hour or so. And then Yuri's going to come online.